Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby, and today we're here to review the 2025 Chinese Grand Prix. Joining me today, we have Grid Talk's very own George Howson,
Morning.
Owain Medford,
Hello.
and also from AHGP, Aaron Harper himself.
Hello.
But before we get into the episode, we must thank our sponsor for this episode, BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or first-time bettor, BetOnline is the ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat-trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. So, F1's first sprint of the season has concluded with Oliver Behrman? No, that's not right. Oscar Piastri converting his first Grand Prix pole position into a lights to flag victory at the Shanghai International Circuit. Can you tell it's been an early one once again for us in the UK? Coming home 10 seconds ahead of his teammate and championship rival Lando Norris, Lando Norris stayed narrowly ahead of George Russell. Whatever. Anyway, the Chinese Grand Prix, it was no classic, that's for sure, but we weren't really sure going into it whether a one stop or two stop would be needed. But once again, it came clear that the one stop was the preferred strategy. It looked like teams were mostly managing their tyres to make that strategy work. But really, who got it right and wrong on strategy today, George?
Well, basically anybody who did a one stop today and made it work, they were the ones that got it right. With the exception of Hamilton, who did a two stop, where he didn't really improve from doing a two stop compared to where he would have been with a one stop. That was just the way to go. It did seem as though the two stop was gonna be the preferred way to go about it. I mean, those front lefts, and anybody who's played the F1 game around China will know that the front left absolutely screams for mercy after about 10, 15 laps. They were graining up, they were looking absolutely chewed up. But once they kind of got through that phase, as we sometimes see around tracks, they actually turned out to be all right in the end. So the two stop was definitely a bit of a disastrous strategy for the Racing Bulls, who, even without Yuki Tsunoda's detonating front wing, wouldn't have been in the top 10 anyway because of that. But yeah, I mean, like you said in the intro, Oscar Piastri absolutely perfect today, absolutely incredible. I mean, it's a bit of a strong thing that people trying to compare him to Alain Prost with the way he used to drive, but I do see shades of that, and we saw shades of that today. He did just enough throughout the race to win very comfortably in the end, and he never looked troubled. So, yeah, anybody did the one stopper can make it work. Really did benefit from that. Anybody did a two stop, it was pretty much a no go, unfortunately, for those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the two stops, Aaron, the Racing Bulls, obviously the two cars really that you could really pinpoint as getting the strategy wrong today. What really happened for the Racing Bulls in China?
Well, the thing is, I don't think they had the pace to drive the strategy. I think with the two stop, what you have to be is so much faster that the other teams basically have to commit to staying out and hanging on, which they all did, or you have to drive them into the pit lane. And Racing Bulls weren't able to do that, and then obviously they were stuck in traffic. Hadjar was stuck behind Doohan, and Sonoda then had to pit with the broken front wing. But the more key example of it is Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari, because he came out of the pit lane, he was blisteringly quick, setting purple laps, but at no point was he ever really quick enough to force the five drivers in front of him to pit. Because if you're able to do that, then you've gained the undercut. Because then you sort of pin the other teams into a position where they have to stay out and they have to take a risk on the tyres. But the tyres never really looked like they were going to drop off. The pace was fairly steady to the end. And Racing Bulls, they took a bit of a gamble. They're doing much better off splitting their strategy rather than putting all their eggs in the two-stop basket. But they clearly thought everyone else was on the two-stop as well. But yeah, the one-stopper was the way to go, which is a shame because from a television watching point of view, you want a two-stop race so that it's not just everyone babysitting their tyres to the end. That final sort of 15, 20 laps where you were wondering who was going to go for the two-stop, and then it quickly became apparent that the two-stop really wasn't going to work. It was a bit of a shame. There was a bit of jeopardy with Lando Norris and his brake pedal, but yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not a classic. We've had some absolutely brilliant races around the Shanghai circuit, especially where tires have fallen apart. Just ask Kimi Raikkonen in 2012. But today wasn't one of those days. It's weird because the Pirelli rubber, it can be such a knife edge to live on. And yet in the race, they put the hard tires on, and everyone was like, oh, great. I'll just, one hand on the wheel and I'll cruise to the finish. It's fine. But obviously, they weren't one hand on the wheel. So, yeah, it was interesting to see how it panned out in the end. And yeah, the one stopper was the way to go. And those who did it, they reaped the rewards.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, in contrast to the chaos of Australia that we had, it kind of made China look a bit like a damp squib to an extent. But, ultimately, like just because we don't see the on-track overtakes and stuff doesn't necessarily mean it's not an exciting race. But at the same time, they certainly help in terms of allowing it to stay in people's, general F1 culture memories and things like that. But a team who really nailed the strategy today, Owain, is Haas. I've got to give it to them for their Haas class of a strategy. Esteban Ocon started P11 and finished P7. Ollie Behrman started P17 and finished P10, as opposed to how I said in the intro, where he had a lights to flag victory. But after something of a disaster for Haas in Melbourne, and obviously there was a lot of talk going into China that they basically had a systemically flawed car. They've pulled it out the bag today and secured some much needed points in China.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite surprising because they didn't particularly qualify well. Obviously, Ocon got 11th. But Behrman was down in 17th, and I think it was sort of one of these things. If you kind of expected more of the same, it was a bit sort of slightly topsy-turvy qualifying. There were in the you had cars out of positions in positions that you didn't necessarily expect, just due to the sort of evolution of the circuit. And I think potential. I was about to say potentially it could be, down to the slightly colder weather, but I don't really think that's how it. That's not how it panned out. I mean, otherwise they'd have been maybe better off in Australia. But I think it's kind of similar to Ferrari. Maybe they just had pace that they couldn't unlock. Um, and I think to be honest with you, like a lot of it is, they kind of. I think they must have got the strategy right off the bat, knowing that they're going to have to drive to the tyre. Unfortunately, I don't remember what they started on. But it really did, they drove to it and made sure that they didn't sort of, burn out or grain up the tyres. And they've come on strong at the end, not getting into too many accidents or anything like that. And as you say, it's paid off for them and got them and got them sort of, 2 points finishes, in a battle that we were sort of expecting them to be right at the back. So, yeah, it's honestly, it's worked out so well for them. Again, they, stuck with the one stop. And that very clearly was the reason that they managed to get where they are. And I think what actually helped and what sort of fended off maybe some of the racing bulls and things like that was that there wasn't that much deg at the circuit. That's the thing, you had the graining, but actual tire drop off from load we didn't see. I think just due to the lack of abrasiveness of the new surface. And I think that's maybe part of the reason that they were able to do this is that they weren't having to fend off from people behind because the tires weren't going off, and that combined with their maybe slightly more conservative way of going about it, because they did sort of creep up there as far as I saw, and that's really paid dividends for them.
Yeah, it certainly was more of one of those anonymous kind of results where it's like you reach the end of the race and you're like, oh wow, so and so's here. We did obviously see a few overtake attempts from Oliver Behrman going into the hairpin. What would have been a classic Daniel Ricciardo last of the late breakers moves had he not locked up going into the hairpin. But still a great move nonetheless, and it's good to see the confidence that some of these rookies have got, particularly as opposed to maybe some of the other rookies in other teams and situations. But George, are Mercedes in the picture? Because George Russell now has had two podiums in two races. Antonelli obviously had a strong showing in Australia, but kind of suffered from strategy calls and falling victim to the undercut. But are they quietly in the championship picture? Are they loudly in the championship picture? What do you think?
It's strange because I've just looked up the standings and they're in second place, I believe. So that would normally put you quite loudly into the championship picture after 2 rounds. I mean, the pace from George Russell, he overtook Lando Norris through the pit stops and got re-overtaken himself actually later on as well. But there is some pace in that car. I do think. I mean, I said at the start of the season, this car is going to be good enough to win races this season. It just needs the correct conditions and. I feel like this was actually a good illustration of how maybe we can expect Mercedes to be because yesterday in the sprint they weren't really anywhere and it was a lot hotter yesterday than what it was today. That Mercedes car seems to work really well in cold conditions. Silverstone last year it was really cold because of the rain and everything by F1 standards anyway. And same thing for Las Vegas, same thing for Belgium as well. It's not a coincidence by any means. So I I hesitate to say they're going to be in the championship picture. I feel like they're overall around that third, fourth fastest car, really. I mean, Antonelli. I'm sure there'll be some people maybe criticizing him today, but this is second F1 race. He's 18 years old. You can't expect him to be consistently amazing every single week. He didn't have the best race today overall. Got stuck behind Yuki Tsunoda for a while, but also, credit Yuki Tsunoda. He was fantastic this weekend. Really, really unlucky with strategy and, like I said, his front wing literally just falling to pieces on the straight. I've never seen that before. Need to do some testing for that at the Racing Bulls factory. So I think in the constructors, it's going to be a massive ask, really. McLaren look comfortably the fastest car in most conditions, I would say. Max Verstappen can always produce some magic in that Red Bull. And I feel like in the right conditions, as well as we saw in the sprint race, that Ferrari as well can be very, very quick. I don't quite see that from Mercedes yet, I'll be honest. But who knows it's 2 weeks away. If it's cold in Japan in April, which is not unheard of by any means, we could see a Mercedes win. You can't predict this season. I think one thing that we did get correct when we were saying our predictions is that it's going to be unpredictable in terms of how close it is at the front for the most part. But I wouldn't really back Mercedes for a championship.
Kind of following on from that then, Aaron, how do you feel about obviously kind of what George has just said about where Mercedes lie based on today? Of course, George Russell was ahead of Max Verstappen. He's been ahead of Max Verstappen through most of this season so far as well. Is this the pecking order ultimately?
Difficult to say. We've only got a sample set of 2 races, and obviously Australia was sort of skewed a bit by the rain. But look, let's not doubt the job that Mercedes have done. That car looks fairly drivable. It doesn't look like it's got any real vices in it. So obviously Kimi Antonelli only P8, but look, it's only his second ever Grand Prix at this level. So that it's going to take some time for him to really come to the party in that sense. By the second half of the season, I would expect him to be a lot closer to Russell's pace, getting amongst the Ferraris and challenging perhaps Verstappen on a day where the Red Bull isn't challenging for victory. That Red Bull is on a knife edge as well. So it's going to flip between challenging the McLarens at the front and battling for fifth, sixth, seventh with the Ferraris and the Mercedes. And then, again, with Ferrari, on Friday, Hamilton on pole position for the sprint, won the sprint dominantly, but that was because he had clear air. Position on the track is going to be key this season, especially at circuits like China, where it's so difficult to follow and it punishes the front tyres. So sort of back to Mercedes, it's going to be very situational. Mercedes are going to be up and down. There might be weekends where suddenly they are the fastest car because of the situation that they find themselves in. And that's the sort of season that we want to see. We don't want to walk into a race weekend knowing, okay, well, this team's going to be the fastest, this team's going to be second, and these are the teams that are going to be at the back. We want it to be mixed up. We don't want it to be completely random because we've seen that before, and it actually gets a little bit too unpredictable. You're not quite sure what the narrative is. You're just sort of responding to everything. And there can be too much shock and awe and excitement. But I think if we have a steady sort of fluctuation in terms of what we can expect to see, and then it's about the teams developing the cars as much as they will this season. They won't do a huge amount because they'll be focusing on 2026. So you might see races where Mercedes are the top team. But I echo George's thoughts. I don't think they're going to win the constructors title. If they put something together on that card that really elevates it, George Russell's consistency at the moment could get him into the hunt. But it's it's just a little step off at the moment. There doesn't seem to be, from one of those three chasing teams, anyone who looks like they're going to really step up and match McLaren. It's probably more likely that McLaren will pull away because they've got that advantage, and everyone else will just turn their attention to 2026 and look to have their own advantage next year. So it's going to be sort of a watch this space, but like George said, Mercedes probably not favourites for the title or really considering a charge for it.
Yeah, probably not favorites, but if you have a particular favorite podcast and it happens to be Grid Talk, why not take five to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts? And if you're one of the 77% of people who aren't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. But, Owain, let's have a look at Oscar Piastri then, given obviously what Aaron's just been saying about McLaren very much being the favourites and probably having the two best drivers on the grid to do so with the car that they've got. Oscar Piastri has done pretty much exactly what he's needed to do over the sprint and the race yesterday and today. Second behind a dominant Lewis Hamilton and a pole to win in China for the Grand Prix. Obviously, there were some braking issues affecting his teammate, but how needed was what Oscar Piastri has done this weekend?
I mean, given that it probably is, I agree with Aaron and say that it probably is the fastest car. Um, it's looking towards McLaren being the most consistent, very clearly at the top. Just looking at the sort of the three qualifying sessions and the three races that we've had thus far. It is kind of leaning towards, well, as much as some teams seeming better in some conditions, some teams are seeming a little better in other conditions and other types of circuit. I know we're going off two, so I don't want to put all I don't want to put too much stock into that. But what we can see is very clearly the McLarens are the most competitive, and because of that, given the issues that obviously he had, very unfortunate in Australia. Piastri really needed to get back on terms. And obviously a win is the best way to do that. It's one of these things of, he came in second in the sprint, which also helped. That's got him 7 valuable points. Oh, sorry, 6 valuable points over his teammate Norris. And to get the win, obviously, from pole is just going to give you so much confidence. And I think I don't think that he would have lost any confidence from the conditions in, from what happened in Australia. I think that's total freak accident. Basically, his teammate did exactly the same thing. You can't say that that's a mistake by Piastri any more than it is for Norris. And absolutely, this is exactly the result he needed to continue the championship fight, making sure he's not losing too much ground too early on. And I think it also sort of gives that battle is, we go to the more regular weekend after Australia and the effects of the weather there. And, immediately he's come in, he's got a decent position, in the sprint race and then come along and then got pole and then a lights to flag victory that was, we didn't see anything of him because he was that far ahead. You only see that normally after, a few races of a completely dominant car, sort of a la the 2022 Red Bull, for example, like that sort of thing. That's what it was like. The action was happening elsewhere. He was winning out there, winning the race. And really, I think, as you say, it was essential. Basically, it was absolutely essential that he come out, do this. And a driver of Piastri's caliber, is going to be able to do that, and he has done. That is the level of importance that this race win has for him.
Yeah, definitely. And George, following on from this, you and Tom on our preview for China were talking about the McLaren, domination and ultimately Tom compared it to the two Mercedes that we had out front in 2014, who were both very much fighting each other. and producing very, exciting races. And ultimately, it was only really when one of them had an issue that meant that the other one was 30 seconds or so up the field, like led to, a bit less interesting races, let's say, in the polite way of phrasing it. Do you think the two drivers that they've got can match each other? Like, obviously, we've only seen the two races so far this season. There is that caveat, but it looks like they certainly have the potential to be fighting throughout the whole season if they're allowed to.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for what it's worth, I think they will be allowed to as well. McLaren does find itself at the moment looking like quite the fastest car by some margin. So I imagine for at least for now, while there's not a realistic, consistent challenger in the Constructors' Championship, they're going to be allowed to race. I don't see that being a problem. And yeah, I mean that gap at the end nearly being 10 seconds, that's a bit of a, if you just look at that, you think, oh, Oscar Piastri's absolutely walked it. And yeah, he was relatively comfortable, but it was because of Norris's brake issues. He did back off. He knew he had that gap to George Russell, so he could take it steady and not really risk having an off or anything like that. But I do think that the two drivers that are going to be quite close to one another, they were quite close to one another in Australia as well until Piastri went off and took a long time to get back as well. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting between these two guys. And I absolutely agree with what Owain said as well. I think it was absolutely needed for Oscar Piastri to win and to beat Norris convincingly in the sprint as well on Saturday. That also helps. Surprisingly, in the Drivers' Championship, it's actually pretty tight. Just 10 points between Norris and Piastri, but there's George Russell and Max Verstappen sandwiched between them as well. So it's tight. It's tight at the top of the Drivers' Championship. But yeah, I expect these two to be pretty close to one another. There's going to be some tracks that favour Norris more. There's going to be some tracks that favour Piastri more. Piastri too. I mean, I honestly thought that Norris was gonna do better than Piastri this weekend because Norris did very well here 12 months ago. He was pretty close to challenging Max Verstappen for the victory, and I can't remember where Piastri was, but I know he was outside the top three. But you have to remember as well the learning curve and the improvement from Piastri, who's only somehow in his third season of Formula One racing. He's going to be improving fast, and he's going to be gaining a lot of experience around these tracks where last year he hadn't raced around some of them, or the year before that hadn't raced in Formula One at all before that year. So I think it's going to be a really, really good battle between these two. We're going to see them being quite close on track. I just hope, as a McLaren fan, they keep it respectful and they don't drive into one another. But as we've seen from teammate battles in the past, like the Red Bulls, like the Mercedes, like the McLarens, if you go far enough back as well, over a long season, tempers sometimes do get the better of these guys.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if we see Lando Norris deliberately crashing in Monaco qualifying to secure pole position, or any of the things that we saw between 2014 and 2016. Let's see what happens in Spain as well. But yeah, certainly two close teammates, and Oscar Piastri will be grateful as well in his third season at McLaren that they are no longer trudging around at the back, unable to keep hydraulic pressure for more than 2 laps. But Aaron, going from two strong teammates to maybe some mixed fortunes across teams. We saw like both in Australia and China, like mixed fortunes at Williams. But we saw today Alex Albon putting a strong one-stop strategy in, making his mediums last a staggering 20 laps from the opening stint, and then receiving a new set of hards as a birthday present, whilst his teammate just hasn't really been on the pace at all weekend. But they'll be grateful to at least have both cars finish, but there's still some work to do for Williams, it seems.
I think Albon's delivering at a very high standard. I think a lot of people perhaps expected Carlos Sainz to go into that team and almost wipe the floor with Alex Albon. But I think what we have to remember is this is not the Alex Albon who was left basically in a mess after he finished that 2020 season at Red Bull. A lot of drivers are being chewed up and spat out by the Red Bull system. We're in the process of seeing yet another one in Liam Lawson. But Albon has rebuilt himself brilliantly at Williams, and he's leading that team. And the thing is, you have to cut Carlos a little bit of slack because the transition from one team to another is tricky. He's going from a front-running car to a car that's sharp end of the midfield, but it's going to have some issues. I just think, yeah, he's struggling to get on top of the balance in terms of getting the car into the window that he needs with the tyres. And a lot of drivers are running into this issue. But obviously, Alex, with all that experience with the team and understanding the car from last season, these cars have evolved from what they were last year. He's just tapping into all of that knowledge and he's working away and picking up the points, which is critical. And this is the whole reason that James Vowles wanted Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon as a pairing. Because on the days where Albon doesn't get the job done and isn't performing to the usual level, you would hope and one would expect that Carlos Sainz gets the job done instead. So you keep that points tally ticking over. And when Carlos is having his trickier days, like he is at the moment, to adapt to the team and just get everything sorted out, Albon's that known quantity, that consistent force within the team that's still going to pick up the points. So I don't think Williams will be too worried right now. They'll still be working through getting Carlos settled in. He just needs time on track. And this kind of harks back to what he was saying pre-season, that he had a day and a half to get to know this car. That's not nearly enough. These cars, they're not put a driver in, give them a steering wheel and four tires and off they go like they used to be. They are computers on wheels and they're doing 150 miles an hour around corners. It's not an easy thing to drive by any stretch of the imagination, no matter how experienced you are. Even Lewis Hamilton, with all of his experience, is finding it tricky. Fernando Alonso has had issues in the past adapting to cars in new teams, usually because the engine wasn't very good, but that's a different point. So if I'm James Vowles, I'm not worried at all. I'm delighted that Albon's getting the points, and that's what he's there to do. You concentrate on making sure that Carlos is comfortable and extracting the performance from him. And once you do, you've got a mighty pair on your hands. And they should be regularly in the top 10 with both cars this season as the season progresses. So, yeah, I'm not too worried about Williams. Even though things are a little bit lopsided in terms of the point scoring at the moment, it's not a problem.
Yeah, I think a very sensible approach to, the Williams situation at the moment as well, particularly, of course, new drivers moving to the team, Alex Albon not being the Alex Albon of Red Bull. And we'll get to, the Red Bull factory of driver chewing in our post show. But just before we get to our driver of the day, I do want to touch on Ferrari if we can, Owain. Of course, aerodynamics, they're for people who can't build engines. So when the car goes quicker, when you lose half your front wing, surely Ferrari's aerodynamicists now are sweating over the potential of their job futures. But in actual fact reality, Charles Leclerc finishing ahead of Lewis Hamilton today, who opted to give Charles Leclerc the better, just cleaner air ultimately, because he said he was struggling a little bit. How do you rate Ferrari's racing weekend in China?
As a whole, I don't think it's, obviously they got the win in the sprint, pole in the sprint with Lewis Hamilton, getting his first win, albeit in the sprint race for Ferrari. But what I'm struggling to understand, at least, or trying to rationalize, is how, given 24 hours different, they seem to lose a little bit of performance in qualifying. And in the race, Lewis Hamilton really struggling to get on with the car, or at least extract the performance from it. And yet, obviously his teammate, with a broken front wing, with clearly flexing a lot more. That won't stand up to the round 9 changes. But really sort of doing very well, and not having the expected effect in that dirty air, where Leclerc was able to stay within basically the DRS window the entire time. I'm surprised it took them that long to switch them around. Maybe they were waiting for the hard tires, but I think something about the change of conditions. I mean, I think it's the only reasonable explanation for what's happened to Ferrari. Going from Saturday into Sunday. You look at the pace at the end of the race, and it wasn't lightning quick for Hamilton in that last third of the Grand Prix, similar to the sprint, where by comparison he was, so much better. It wasn't, I haven't got all the data obviously, but look, it didn't seem like he had the ability to do what he was doing running out front, even in that 20 seconds of clean air. So the only thing I can think it would be would be, something about, the air temperature or something like that, and the track temp just not being what the Ferrari needed to perform. As it's sort of the only change. I don't think it was a bad move for them to take that, to make the changes they did on Hamilton's car and to take that second stop. You lose 2 points. I believe, to Verstappen, but you gain the ability to maybe get a lot more, and he was closing in. Um, yeah, I think they'll have to have a look at it and see if they're, what has changed, what are the difference in factors. They'll, pour through the data surely, because otherwise it seems so weird. It smacks of the 2022, 2023, 2023, 2024 Mercedes, where sometimes it will be lightning quick in the window, but once it was out the window, it was a pain to drive, and I think it's been difficult for Ferrari, but they will get on top of it. I'm fairly certain. But it is just odd to see that, to see a car so, win so convincingly and qualify so well on one set of days, and then the next one just completely fall off and be basically nowhere.
Yeah, it does make you wonder just how much they changed during Parc Ferme as well between the sprint race and qualifying for the Grand Prix. But in terms of our driver of the day, then, Grid Talk officially gave it towards Oscar Piastri, a lights to flag win. We very rarely saw him. But George, do you agree with Grid Talk's positioning, or have you got another one to propose?
I mean, shout out to Esteban Ocon. He was superb today. Everybody knows I'm not the biggest fan of Ocon, but credit where it is due. Him and Haas had a fantastic weekend in the end there with that. But no, I'm gonna stick with Oscar Piastri. Yeah, the fact that we barely ever saw him, I think that speaks volumes, really. He was absolutely comfortable today. Really, really was. And like I said, such a young driver to produce that, look like a seasoned veteran. It was not dislike what Hamilton did yesterday, if I can get my words out there, in the sprint. Just the fact that he was just so far clear, had no problems on the tyres, barely ever heard him, barely ever saw him. Really, really laying down a marker there for a potential championship.
It's the sign of a potentially great drive of not being seen whatsoever in the race from the first and the last lap. But some Haas puns from George Haas in there. That was even worse. Aaron Harper, please save me from this pun hellscape. Who's your driver of the day for China?
I can't save you from the pun hell that we are finding ourselves in, because George was talking about someone who was barely seen and barely mentioned, unless he was starting the race and finishing the race. And my driver of the day is someone with bear in their name, and it's International Bear Day, so why not Ollie Bearman, from 17th all the way to the points. Ran long on those hard tyres to start with, made full use of the mediums and the extra pace once he'd switched to them, pulled off some very nice overtakes. Ciao, thank you very much. Ollie Bearman, driver of the day.
Please bear with us during this section of the podcast. Owain, who's your driver of the day, please?
I'm gonna have to go for Piastri. I think, yeah, as you said, as you summed up, he was, so far away from everyone else. He made sure that he squeezed out Russell on the start. Drove the race well, obviously from the front, but that's where you needed to be to finish off a race like this. I don't, it was very clear that you couldn't race your way to the front and fight your way to the front. In any meaningful way. He managed the tires, managed the situation he was in. He didn't come under that much pressure, but he just, yeah, he didn't put a foot wrong, and I think sometimes that's all you have to do. I mean, they managed the sort of chopping and changing of plans, so well. We didn't know where it was going, but when it was sort of seeing where the wind was taking them, they were like, right, okay, and just executed that one stop to perfection. It's so hard, so difficult to do on a slightly changed track than he'd be used to, and obviously he's got sort of almost the almost. He's 1 point off having the maximum he could have got from this weekend.
Yeah, and if he'd done a fastest lap when we were in 2024, he could have gotten an additional point to, maximize that. But yes, George, where can people find more from you if they want to hear more from you? Or is there anything else you want to plug at this opportunity?
Yeah, if people want to hear some more questionable puns, you can head over to F1 Chronicle. I do a lot of videos on F1 and do some other videos on other topics as well, but F1's the main one. We're almost at 10,000 subscribers now on YouTube. I'm hoping to hit that in the gap between now and the next race in Japan, but we'll see how that goes. We're on regular social medias as well, Facebook, the one that's formerly known as Twitter, as well as a lot of us. We're on Substack as well. We've got the largest F1 newsletter in the world on Substack, and I'm going to keep saying that until someone proves me wrong, but I'm pretty sure we are. But yeah, and just if you want to see some more in that sense, you can also head out to the Grid Talk, because we're on a few of those at the end of the day.
We are indeed. Aaron, anything you want to plug at this opportunity?
Well, I will tell you all about my YouTube channel, which is AHGP. It's an F1 Manager Experiments channel. So recently I've been doing all things F1 2025. We've simulated the entire season to see who would come out on top. And then I randomized the grid with the new feature and did the same thing. So we will get cracking on with more experiments. I've got a visitor in the office. No, it's all good. Yeah, so if you want to check that out, it's ASGP on YouTube, and we've got a thriving Discord community as well. So if Discord's your thing, you can come and join us there too.
Absolutely, go and do. Owain, anything you want to plug at this point?
I would like to plug our Grid Talk social channels. Obviously, unfortunately, we have had a slight change in the lineup. But if you want to keep up to date with anything like that, the number one place is on our Grid Talk social channels. We're at Grid Talk UK on all of the social media channels with the @. So come and see us on Blue Sky. Come and see us on Threads. Come and see us on Instagram. Just interact with us, see what give us your thoughts on the race. Was it as dull as I'll be honest with you, I think all of us have kind of seemed resigned to, or did that set your pants on fire? Did you love it? Yeah, come and talk to us on our Grid Talk social channels. That's at Grid Talk UK on all the social media platforms with the @. I think I might have just accidentally just taking any embarrassment away from anyone else there.
I mean, in fairness, there's been definitely a vibe to this particular podcast, and I don't know if we're trying to make up for what the Chinese Grand Prix was, but at the same time, that's what we're here for. But yes, there has certainly been some conversation going on in the live chat, and also if you want to let us know how you thought the race went, then let us know on social media. And we're having some breaking news that potentially Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly could be DSQ'd for not meeting the minimum weight. So we'll also get to that in our post show, as I am currently signing off. But yeah, Grid Talk is available on YouTube, where most of our race review shows are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to our Patreon for exclusive content? And also make sure you subscribe to be the first to know when each new weekly episode is released. I'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online, and goodbye. And as we transition into a post show, what on earth is this breaking news? Is someone able to explain? Does someone have more details? Go on, Aaron, you've put your hand up.
They're both underweight. They're getting thrown out. There's no we crossed this last year with George Russell.
Lance Stroll gets points.
Well, that would promote. Yeah, it would promote. Let's have a look. Where's my if I can find the right window. So a Leclerc disqualification would bump Hamilton up to P5. Ocon would go up to P6. Oliver Behrman, my driver of the day, would go up to 9th. Albon would go up to 8th. Anthony to 7th. Gasly would be disqualified, so Stroll would finish in, hang on, that would bump him
P10.
up. Yeah, P10, I think. So Ocon would go sixth, Anthony seventh, Albon ninth, so eighth, Behrman ninth, yeah, Stroll 10th. So yeah, Stroll would get a point. Carlos Sainz would still miss out.
So unfortunate for Carlos Sainz, but yeah, not meeting the minimum weight, obviously, that's a pretty big thing. And as we saw in Belgium last season, it can take away race wins. But is this potentially like fuel? Is this maybe like not having enough tread on the tires?
Could be a bit of both. I mean,
Bit of both.
they changed Leclerc's front wing and he was still underweight. So it's probably I don't think they're allowed. They don't weigh the car with fuel, so it might be
Mm.
the tread, the wear on the tires. Because Leclerc's pace just died in the final couple of laps. He just another lap, and Hamilton would have passed him on the track. So, um, yeah, I think it might be to do with the tires and how much tread is left on those Pirellis. So, yeah, bad news for Charles Leclerc, bad news for Ferrari. They'll lose some points. But
Mm.
look, underweight is a cut and dried thing. If you are found to be underweight, you are getting thrown out.
Yeah, exactly. And, if Pierre Gasly wasn't underweight, that would then give Alpine their first points of the season. So it shows the kind of disastrous consequences that it can have because, Charles Leclerc being underweight, leading to Pierre Gasly being promoted up to P10 points. But unfortunately, Pierre Gasly also falling foul of this news as well. So yeah, as you say, that's pretty cut and dry. Like if it's kind of like, speeding in the pit lane. If you're under investigation, we usually expect to see a penalty coming. And yeah, that's just not the news that Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly would have been wanting to hear going into this weekend. The main talking point I wanted to bring to us for our post show, really, as Aaron kind of alluded to, is the situation going on with Red Bull's driver program. Because once again, we've seen Liam Lawson just have a disappointing weekend. Is this the car? Is it the team not necessarily giving him the support he needs? Is it just the Red Bull pressure cooker? And I will open it up to the floor.
It's probably a few different things, to be honest. The pressure in Red Bull, as we've seen, is immense. The only guy that can seem to deal with it on a consistent basis is Max Verstappen, and that's because he's so bloody good. Um, but
No, that's because he's the pressure.
well, I don't. Well,
He's
he's the standard, isn't he? That's the thing. He's the yardstick to which everybody's measured against. You're always measured up against your teammate. But when your teammate's that good, it just feel a bit unfair. But regardless of that, even by the standards of Sergio Perez and Gasly and Albon before him, Lawson's start at life at Red Bull has been absolutely abysmal. It really, really has been. Um, that car just does not suit him. It can't do. Like he's a competent driver. I know he's really inexperienced, but he's a competent driver. He's a good one. I really do think he is. He proved that coming in at short notice for AlphaTauri and Racing Bulls last couple of seasons. And now the pressure's on. There is already talk of Tsunoda replacing him, maybe for as soon as Tsunoda's next home race in Japan in a couple of weeks. Um, it's just, yeah, it's a bit ridiculous to be honest. It is absolutely. I can't think of a disparity though between teammates on this kind of level in a long, long time. It is stunning to be honest. It really, really is. But we'll see. The cycle continues for
George,
Red Bull.
are you surprised that Lawson's struggling?
I'm surprised he's struggling this much.
I'm
Last in
I'm not surprised
qualifying.
at all.
last in qualifying twice. I want to point that out. That's both qualifying sessions last.
I expected him to be a long way off Verstappen, but like lower end of the top 10, kept picking up the odd points here and there, which is still disappointing, I would say, in that car. But to be dead last twice in qualifying and then basically make up nothing during the race, that is, yeah, I am surprised at that, to be honest, Aaron. Are you not?
I'm not surprised he's struggling. I thought he would struggle in the first few races because their circuits he's not been to in a Formula One car ever. He's obviously done Suzuka in a Super Formula. He has driven Shanghai many years ago, getting on for near a decade ago. But just the way Like all of the information that we get coming out of Red Bull is Max Verstappen likes a car in a very certain way. And he's obviously very, very good at what he does. So you're going to build the car to accentuate all of those skills, I would suppose. And I think there's very few drivers who could go into that other Red Bull and actually handle it. Allegedly, Yuki Tsunoda got on quite well with it in the postseason test in Abu Dhabi last year. So maybe he is the answer. In a weird way, it might be Yuki Tsunoda is the answer to this conundrum. Who on earth do you put alongside Max Verstappen in the second Red Bull? Because we've had, well, Ricardo did all right, but then he left for Renault. And that's when the whole unraveling of this continues, really. And it starts from Gasly, Albon, Perez, Lawson. And they're not terrible drivers. Two of those are race winners in Perez and Gasly. I mean, if you start putting Tsunoda in there and he struggles too, well, they're probably going to ditch him at the end of the season anyway because they won't be working with Honda anymore. So, Hadjar, he's had two races. Who on earth do they put in there? They've tried to build up young drivers, but they won't put them in there. They've put a young driver in with 11 races. It's crazy. They had an experienced hand who couldn't get on with it. Maybe the answer is 3 racing ball cars.
If I can also come in on this, I saw a very interesting post the other day on social regarding obviously the amount of pressure that Helmut Marko ends up putting on the rookies in the Red Bull program. Is there potentially a reason as to why the pressure should actually be on Helmut Marko? Because his entire point for the Red Bull family team is to nurture young drivers and get them to be the best they can be in Formula One. And please point to the last F1 rookie driver that he's got to a comfortable position in Formula One.
Max Verstappen.
And he came into Formula One in 2015. So that's a decade ago. Like, has Formula One's moved past the need for this dinosaur?
I don't know. It's strange, isn't it? Because he's obviously done a good job in getting drivers to Formula One, but getting them to Red Bull, it's not worked out. Oh, Owain, you were going to say something there, weren't you? Sorry, I interrupted.
I was going to say there's a phrase in management, isn't there, which if someone needs firing after 3 years, that's their fault. But if someone needs firing after 3 days, that's your fault. And it kind of smacks of that. Like I don't know whether it's the car, and as you say, developing it towards Max Verstappen's particular style of driving to the exclusion of all else, which at this point, if it is that seems foolish because I get it. I think I've said before, I think the calculus for Red Bull is completely different for what they actually want. They are getting huge deals off, Mobile One and their sponsors, and they are the advertising arm of a energy drink company. It's not like they're trying to sell cars. They're trying to sell energy drinks at the end of the day. So there is an element of, as long as we can get a thing that says Red Bull on the front page or on the sports pages, or on the news, on the front of news websites or in clickbaity articles or any kind of article, let's say, right, then it doesn't necessarily matter how well they're doing in constructors, because clearly they've got more than enough money and they're willing to put more than enough money into the racing program, particularly in the cost cap era. But it just seems, like I say, it seems foolish because you could end up with yourself at a point where, well, what if Max Verstappen does leave or does go somewhere else because he's not currently winning, and he's fighting, but that could just be his, he's fighting and making a are being developed around him might be ultimately a dead end, but easy to be suckered into. But then there's also the thing of, as you say, like the driver program, which doesn't seem more like a driver program. It seems like a mincing machine to take competent drivers of all, how many is it? It's 8 or 9 at this point, and just completely crush their ability out. and their confidence. What's the point in that as well? Like it seems short-sighted in various different ways, and I don't think it's fit for purpose anymore. I would argue that even I don't know, I can't remember exactly what the point at the point where Max Verstappen came in and whether he was developed by Red Bull or whether Toto just lost him because of that. Um, but at that point, there's then an argument that the last successful driver in Formula One that came through the Red Bull driver program is Sebastian Vettel. That's I think there's the argument for that, and that's even worse. I honestly don't know what's going on, and it's got beyond the point of hilarity. It's just sad now.
Yeah, it really is. And obviously there's so much more discussion going on here that, we could make several podcasts about it, and I'm pretty sure we have slash will do, even if we haven't already. But do keep this conversation going with us as we plugged several times during the show. Our socials are at Grid Talk UK. And of course, keep tuning in for future episodes where we will presumably talk about this again. But yes, thank you everyone that's tuned in. It's been great to see some conversation going on in the live chat. And thank you to the three of you for joining me today for what was Grid Talk's race review of the Chinese Grand Prix. And on that note, thank you very much and goodbye.